bet you don't know that music, do you? Well, to be honest, I kind of hope that you don't, because today we are going to be talking about one of the most important pieces in music history, and a piece that may, and I say may because we don't know for sure, but it may have played a part in the history of a European monarchy. And make sure you stay till the end because, Beethoven, it's finally happened. He has reached the pinnacle of his career. It took 250 years, but he has finally reached the true pinnacle of his career, and I will show it to you at the end today. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 30, the big 3-0 of my Musical Moments series. Thank you for joining me. A couple of things have come up which have converged to make me think about a certain piece which I haven't thought about in a long time. And one of these is I recently saw a little bit of this great documentary that has just come out. I haven't seen the whole thing yet, so I am not endorsing it. But the little part that I saw looked very interesting. It's called Jimmy Carter, Rock and Roll President, and it's about how the Carter campaign used rock and roll for the first time in history to kind of bring attention and kind of a theme and a feeling to their campaign. This combined obviously with what's going on in DC, all of these stunning, stunning events going on in DC. And the third thing was I did a narration for another video, which was a performance of some music of Stravinsky. And when I was talking about it, I mentioned the riot that broke out outside the theater at the premiere of The Rite of Spring. There was so much incredible drama. Some people thought that he was a genius. Some people thought he was a heretic for the music that he wrote, which opened that night. All of these things combined brought to mind this piece for me, and it's a great story that I don't think gets told enough because it's really interesting and kind of fun. And it has a lot of maybes in it. So today we have story time with Bruce. Now, I mentioned this might have had something to do with one of the major European revolutions that was going on. Now, the revolution in question is the Belgian Revolution of 1830 and their revolution against the Netherlands and King William I. You might think, I've never heard of King William I. It doesn't really matter. That's not the important part. And this piece that I'm talking about is an opera known as La Muette de Portici, and it's by a Frenchman, Daniel Aubert. It's kind of strange because it's in French, but also in Italy, because the opera itself is French, but it takes place in Italy. It's a love story set against the protests in Naples against Spanish rule in 1647. So we get way back into history very, very quickly in this story. The details of that do not matter. Now, I don't know how good your Italian or your French is, but the title roughly translates to The Mute of Porcini, because one of the major characters in this story, in this case, the jilted lover, she is a mute, which is kind of interesting considering it's an opera. And I thought, well, that's interesting. We've got an opera where one of the main characters is mute. And this piece holds another distinction in music history because it's really considered the grandmother of grand opera. And in that sense, it has all the characteristics of grand opera. It's this big, huge, epic piece, 5 acts long, uses a large orchestra, very impressive, spectacular scenic events. There is a fully staged ballet as part of it. And this is important. It is actually a love story between just a few people, but it's told against this sort of backdrop of great historical events, including not only this revolution, but Mount Vesuvius erupts too in the opera. So I did say spectacular scenery, right? So the story goes like this. King William IV, by the way, this is not the story of the opera. Some other time I'll do a little video about that. Stay tuned. This is the story of this performance of the opera. So King William I, as I said, was rather unpopular, but he decides to have a big 3-day festival celebrating his 15 years on the throne. Now he says, hey, there's going to be this incredible festival. We're going to have fireworks, we're going to have parades, and we're going to have a performance of this opera. Now this is notable because this opera had already been banned by him and the authorities there, because at performances of the opera during the rather recent French Revolution, they had said, you know what, let's not perform that opera. Even though he had seen it and enjoyed it, he said, let's not perform that opera because we just don't want to court any kinds of problems. So he said, you know what, no performances of that opera. But as part of this festival, he's like, the band is going to end, and that's going to be the last night of this festival celebrating 15 years on the throne for me. So he announces the festival, and he says, hey, day 1, fireworks. Day 2, parades. Day 3, this opera. Now, there were lots of anti-monarchists in town who were kind of offended that the king who was so unpopular at this time, is having this big festival. So they started putting their own posters around town that said, day 1, fireworks. Day 2, parades. Day 3, revolution. So the king thinks, I see some trouble brewing here. So he thinks, no fireworks, no parades. Let's keep the opera. So it is said that on that night, during the performance of the opera, Act 2, this duet that you're hearing right now, which the text of the duet is all about love of the homeland, etc., that people in the theater stood up and they went out into the streets and they joined this protest that was already going on. These people joined it, and several months later, it eventually did indeed lead to the independence of Belgium from the Netherlands. By October of that year, this was all happening in August. Now, truth be told, this music didn't really cause the revolution because they were already planning on that night being the night of the protest, etc. And the people in the theater, they knew that they were going out to join these, but they thought rather than sit here and watch the rest of this plot, which they probably already knew because it had been banned after all, the surest way to get you to pay attention to something is to ban it, then they went out into the streets to join this pre-planned protest. But it does make you think about music and its use in the political sphere. So here's hoping to a return to some relative normalcy in our own political system. And I want to check out the rest of that documentary about Jimmy Carter and his campaign. And that really got me thinking about how some artists today are objecting to political campaigns that use their music. You know, you've heard stories on all sides of the political spectrum. You've heard stories about artists saying, I don't want you using that song. And it does seem like campaigns, especially in the primaries where there are so many candidates and they're really looking for a hook, some way to sort of be memorable, and they're looking for a song to associate with their own campaign. But some of these artists who are still alive, they're saying, I don't want you using it. Maybe I don't want any campaign or using it, or maybe I don't want your campaign. Either way, these artists are alive, able to kind of express their opinion, say you can't use it. But you know, many classical composers obviously have passed away, so they're not able to express their own voice about that, and most of their music has entered the public domain, so they can't say, hey, I want it for that or not for that. And certainly in popular culture, there might be times they'd say, I don't want you to use my music, or times they might say, thank you for bringing my music to a whole new generation of people and being relevant to them.
The Lone Ranger.
But today, I leave you with the music of Beethoven and his brilliant 7th Symphony, which for some reason, I can't understand why, but for some reason it has been used in this commercial. Now this commercial is brand new. It just started airing the first of the year, but I've seen it 3 or 4 times, and every time I think, I don't know what to think. But I think if you're going to frame it as a positive, you can say, you know, you really know when you've made it as a composer, when your music is used for, wait for it, a dog food commercial. Enjoy! The sound of the dog eating in that commercial is so loud. I don't know why it's mixed so loud. Oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you another story. It didn't really fit in this, but Aubert, who's the composer of the opera that we've been talking about today, he never went to performances of his own work. He always said that if I ever went to a performance of my own music, I would never be able to write another note. So he refused to actually go to his own performances. But he loved the music of Rossini, so he planned to attend a performance of William Tell, the Lone Ranger theme that we just heard. He sits down in the theater, and right as it begins, they start playing the opera that we've been talking about, because apparently they had to make a switch at the last minute. So Aubert, he stands up, right, and runs out of the theater. You know, if even the composer can't stand to listen to their own music,